Actively managing your personal brand is critical if you want to make a significant impact in the areas of your life important to you. I've spent most of my life working in the world of branding products. More recently, I've been exploring the world of personal branding and wrote a book on this, Brand New, Brand You. And the podcast has come out of this as a way to share first-hand experiences from some of Australia's most recognised personal brands. Matt Anderson PSM commenced as Director of the Australian War Memorial in April 2020. Mr. Anderson joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as a graduate in 1995. He was most recently the Deputy High Commissioner to the United Kingdom between the years of 2016 and 2020. He has also had postings to South Africa, Papua New Guinea, and served as the Chief Negotiator of the Peace Monitoring Group on Bougainville through 2001 and 2002. Matt has a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and Strategic Studies from Deakin University and a Master's degree in Foreign Affairs and Trade from Monash University. Matt Anderson was awarded the Public Service Medal for his role in leading the humanitarian and consular response to the 2009 Pacific tsunami. In 2014, he led the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on MH17 task force following the downing of the aircraft over Ukraine. He was made a Fellow of Monash University in 2018. He is proud to be both the son of a National Serviceman and patron of the National Servicemen's Association. Matt is also a graduate of the Royal Military College Duntroon. He served with the Royal Australian Engineers as a troop commander and also undertook instructional and staff appointments. Matt Anderson is married to Lou, a current serving DFAT officer, and they have 3 children. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come and talk today. What a privilege and a pleasure it is to be sitting here talking to you. Even though we do tend to see each other quite regularly, it is a moment that we have to be able to talk about you as an individual, but you who is leading and has led so many different initiatives through your career so far.
Well, thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for your interest in me, both professionally and personally. Appreciate it greatly.
Matt, it's an absolute pleasure, and I think that I'd like to begin with the situation that you find yourself today as Executive Director, or the Director. I commonly call you the CEO of the War Memorial. Such an iconic brand in that of the War Memorial. How does it sit with you as from a personal perspective, you the brand?
So you're right to call me the CEO. The act that governs me refers to my position both as the Director of the Australian War Memorial and as its CEO. But there's only been 13 directors of the Australian War Memorial in history. So it is one of those rare titles and rare positions and opportunities and honours to be in this position. How does it sit with me personally? I often say that other than being a husband and a father, being Director of the Australian War Memorial at this moment in time is the most important thing I'll ever do. And I feel that both that weight and that opportunity daily.
And do you see yourself as your personality as a personal brand?
I'm beginning to. That's dawned on me very slowly because of the impact that the Australian War Memorial has had on so many people. Its place in the nation's consciousness tends to rightly not overshadow, but puts everyone who works there into their appropriate relief. They are not the institution. They are a small part of what is a much larger being an institution. And certainly as the director of the organisation and as the Australian War Memorial, I feel that weight keenly, but I am certainly, it would be fair to say, have had the opportunity to grow into that role, to grow into the, to much more closely associate myself with an institution about which I'm so proud. So it's a very close alignment between what I would argue are the memorial's values and my own personal values.
And do you think the situation you now find yourself is a result, and your mindset is as a result of the journey you've taken so far where you've been in both the services as a return service person and also being in a government representative role. Does that tend to impact individuals, and that individuals can't take the view that they should be able to stand out with their own personal brand?
I think it's probably a wise insight when you are within the Australian Defence Force, and I spent a decade in the Defence Force as a young officer. You are very much, that's also tribal. The Australian Defence Force, the Australian Army, and then the corps that you're in, and then the squadron that you're in within that corps. That's all very tribal, very local, very personal because of the different natures of those roles. And speaking frankly, with the Army, it doesn't pay to stand out too much. You want to be known by what you're capable of, by what you've actually done, rather than you want to be measured by results rather than you want your reputation to be what you've achieved. Those two are very closely aligned in the military. That's how you are measured in the military, or how we were measured in the military. But I think then I joined the Foreign Service, and again, the Foreign Service is a very large organisation, and you become a subject matter expert pretty quickly, and you can be known as that subject matter expert in a particular area of expertise. Whereas I was the funny guy. I mean, speaking frankly, I talking about personal brand. I mean, I came in after a decade in the military. I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as a graduate. I came in as an ASO 1, as the bottom of the tree.
ASO 1 is
it's the lowest level entry into an organisation.
Right.
It's the ground floor, but it's also a fast track process. They are going to nurture you and encourage you and try and get you out relatively early. So I know that because people tell me that when I joined the Foreign Service, I was the Army guy, because there would be a handful of people in Foreign Affairs history who they've taken in. I don't know of another person at that stage that they'd taken as a graduate who was a graduate of the Royal Military College. So that made me, that was a point of difference, but I don't know that it was necessarily a positive point of difference, because most people had their own views about what the Army was or wasn't, and what, I hadn't been to an Ivy League university. I hadn't sort of, come through the normal route to get into the Foreign Service. So I was, for 25 years, I was the Army guy in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And then when I joined the Australian War Memorial, I remember Kerry Stokes, the then chairman, saying, "You're that DFAT guy." So there is always going to be that case of, what you did most recently is what defines you on entry to any organisation. But over time, I would think that what has, I guess, my particular strength, I think, is the fact that I'm actually a generalist. I proven in the Army I could turn my hand to anything. I proved in the Foreign Service that, yes, I could go from the South Pacific to Afghanistan to the United Kingdom to Cambodia to a small island in the middle of the Pacific, and throw myself into each of those tasks with the same energy, with the same enthusiasm, with the same determination to succeed wherever I served. So, my firm belief is that if you enjoy what you're doing, you'll do well at it. And if you do well at it, good things should come of it. And that's how I've approached my life. That's how I've approached my career.
Yeah, so you've probably just articulated a very interesting perspective that I believe many struggle with, and that's don't take me for what I do, but who I am. And to move from your DFAT experience into running the Australian War Memorial, the skills are quite different.
They are.
But there are some very clear common alignments in which we'll get on to later on in terms of values, but also leadership. Well, so it's not the rank you had.
No.
It's the person you are that actually defines who you are.
I mean, rank is a title. People, even at the War Memorial, people will come in and call me director this and director that. And I said, that's what it says on the door. I know who I am. I know what position I occupy. I don't need to be referred to by that. Because to me, that's not what gets me out of bed in the morning. What gets me out of bed in the morning is why I'm doing what I'm doing, where I'm doing it.
So how much of this philosophy actually spills over into your children and your family?
You'd have to ask them.
But you'd see it in the examples of what they now do.
Potentially. I think where you're going, I have the honour. I mean, you know, I said at the top, the thing other than being a husband and a father, being director of the memorial is so profoundly important to me and to what I would hope, you know, when you look in the rear vision mirror on life at the things I've been able to achieve, this is going to be one of those moments, one of those positions that I had the honour to occupy and be custodian of. I don't own it, I'm just custodian of it for a short period of time. But when I look at my three beautiful children, my eldest is an officer in the Royal Australian Air Force. Studied English literature at university and shocked us all when she came home and said, "Look what I did today, Dad," and held up her smartphone with the Defence Force careers application on it. And she has excelled, course champion, and is now in a line squadron doing great things. Mm-hmm. Kate, my middle daughter, she is now also in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and is a young desk officer charting her own course and setting sail for whatever, following the eddies and currents of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and wherever she ends up. And young Harry, my son, is second year at the Academy, the Defence Force Academy, wanting to be an Army officer as well. So I remember a conversation with Meg, my eldest, when she applied to join the Air Force, and I just congratulated her on the decision. I was surprised, but I congratulated her. And I said, "It's great, Meg." And she said, "Well, why didn't you encourage me?" And my point at the time was, well, I didn't discourage you. But what I know of the military and what I know of leadership within the military is you've got to want to be there all by yourself. You've got to have made the decision that it's something you want to do, because God forbid she finds herself in harm's way leading men and women. She needs to have the clarity of thought and purpose to have put herself there rather than being there for any other reason other than it's where she wants to be. That's what I'm hoping. And I'm so glad she wanted to do that all by herself. It's wonderful if in some brief way she might have looked at, the debris around our house, that sort of the odd touch point of a life poorly lived by me. I mean, I didn't spend long enough in the military to I'm very proud of my service, but I don't. You mentioned in the intro, I'm a veteran. I mean, I think anyone who's served a day in the ADF, by definition now, is a veteran. But I'm very conscious to divest myself of that title whenever I'm talking about the Australian War Memorial, because that's not who I am. That's not why I'm there.
No.
That's not how I see myself at the memorial. I surround myself by veterans who have a remarkable story to tell. I'm a bit player in that. I've had the honour of serving alongside soldiers, sailors and aviators in places like the Solomon Islands or Afghanistan, but I don't pretend in that narrative to put myself in their orbit, because I'm not.
Well, I totally relate to that in the sense that I feel totally inadequate, having never served a day, only in the cadets. So
I started in the cadets as well. There you go. So that was my. But I still talk to people. I had the honour of speaking to the cadets at the Australian Defence Force Academy a couple of years ago now. And there's a point to make, which I always want to make, is that I know that I still refer to my time in the ADF and going through the Royal Military College as my finishing school. I learned more about myself as a young man, what I was capable of, what I was good at, what I was bad at. It's the sort of institution that will, knock you down when you're getting cocky and also pick you up at your lowest ebb. And you get to not only study yourself as a leader, but look at others and watch them grow and take lessons into life. And for me, it was my finishing school. I know in my time in the ADF, there's not a day that goes by where I'm not thankful for that service. I think I'm richer because of it, because of the training I received, because of the people that I was exposed to, the opportunities I had, the leaders I saw, the good leaders I saw, the bad leaders I saw. All of these are all life lessons for me, and I carried them into the Foreign Service, I'm very specific too about that term, Foreign Service. It's the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. But to me, it was a service. It was as demanding of me, of my family, of my time, as the military was, just in a different way, in a different form, but it was equally demanding. And I would certainly give a shout out to anyone who is in the Foreign Service today, because we've got people in harm's way today. We've got people sitting in the Middle East today doing great things for us, going the wrong way in the event of a crisis, always going the wrong way, going towards harm rather than away from it. And a shout out to everyone in the department who continues to do great things in our name. They are unsung heroes, and I mean that. They are physically brave, they are morally brave. And I was richer for having spent 25 years in the department.
And your mindset and approach is clearly about service, whether in terms of the organisation or to others. Very clearly, that is the case. How do you think others perceive you?
I haven't, I'm conscious of your podcast and your book and the work that you've done on this idea, but I don't give that a lot of thought, if that's honestly how others perceive me. Someone once asked me, fascinating question, they said, if there was to be an epitaph or a word to describe you on your headstone, what would you like it to be? That was a question I was once asked. What I would like it to say is decent, because I think decency informs your values, it informs the way you engage with people, it informs your judgment, it informs how you engage, most importantly how you engage with others, the process that you go through, the sense of do no harm, I think is decency. So that's how I hope, I don't know, but I would hope that people would at least perceive me as decent. We'll probably speak about values later on, but I often, at the Australian War Memorial, we have those 15 values that sit atop the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. They stand guard over him. And one of my decisions with the development was to take those 15 values and then recast them at the southern entrance so that people can reflect on those on arrival and on departure. And I always ask, particularly young cadets, but also school children, when they come through, to look at those 15 values, because that's the easiest exam question they're going to get. Just choose one of those values. These are the 5 fighting qualities, the social qualities, qualities of youth and endeavour. So 15 words. And I ask them to choose one. And I say to them, if you make that your compass heading for the remainder of your career, any one of them, then the men and women that you lead and the men and women that you're led by will be richer for it. And for me, when they then invariably turn around to me and say, well, what's yours? And right in the middle, looking down towards Parliament, ironically, is candour, telling the truth. And I think my lived experience, both in the ADF and certain foreign service, is one of the most difficult things to do, is to be tell the truth to your diggers, but also tell the truth to your bosses. But that's the foundation both of leadership and of good decision making, is facts. To quote John Adams, the US president, John Adams, facts are stubborn things. So it's much easier, I tell my son, it's much easier to remember the truth. I would like to think that both, that woven into decency is this idea of candour, of telling the truth, so that people know where you stand, know what you stand for.
So decency is the action and candour is the value. And is that when we talk about values, candour is obviously one of yours. What are some of the other values that are important to you?
Well, we live in such a fast-paced world, instantaneous gratification, 3-second clips and scroll bait and all those other things. Another thing that's important to me is thoughtfulness. I want people you need to be considered. And I think in a busy world and busy lives, what we don't do is we don't take enough time to stop and pause and consider. We're reflexive in a lot of what we do. And I'd like to think that that's another thing, you can... They used to say about the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, diplomats are very good at admiring the problem. We admire the problem. That's a bit nasty. That's sort of a defence guy saying that, but we DFAT admire the problem. I think they don't admire the problem. I think they pause and they consider a problem and then they act. And that's what I think. I think we need to be thoughtful, but then you need to act. Sometimes inaction is a decision. You can actually decide not to do something, but it's still, so long as there's been a thoughtful process that leads to that outcome, I'm okay with it. But I think that's another thing I would like to think. If people looked at me, I'd like them to think that I was thoughtful.
So thoughtful, candour.
Righto.
Yeah, go a bit further because I think it's... So let's go slightly to the left and think about some of your previous roles, projects, engagements, and where you've been in a situation where your values didn't align with that of the organisation or the engagement for which you were involved, and that you had to walk away.
This isn't being tried. I can't think of something. I genuinely genuinely believe in this idea that you should never lend yourself to that which you don't believe in, right? Don't associate yourself with something if you don't believe in it. Now, I've been very lucky that throughout my life I've been in a position where I can, I can speak for an institution, I can lead a high commission or lead an embassy, lead a war memorial. So it is my job to persuade. I'm lucky enough to sit at the council table. I'm not a member of council of war memorial, but I sit at it. I attend them, and my job is to provide that candour, to provide that truth. And at no stage in the 5.5 years that I've been at the War Memorial has there been an occasion where I've had that conflict, where I've found that they have taken a decision that I don't agree with. Of course, typically the military, you'd salute the flag and say, okay, well that's a lawful order, and I'll execute it. So I can't think of a case where I have found myself in a situation where I have been.
What about when you've been in DFAT, where politics can get in, or politicians can get involved and cause a deflection or a change from what was necessarily agreed on a particular path, which goes against where you had taken a particular stance?
Well, when you join something, again, the Foreign Service or the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in particular, you are a public servant supporting the government of the day that's been democratically elected by the people of Australia to formulate that policy. And your job then as a diplomat or as a public servant is to implement that policy. I remember farewelling Alexander Downer in London. He was the High Commissioner and I was his deputy. And I was remarking at that time that, reflecting on my own life and service and the points of intersection I had with Alexander, all of the absences from my family, whether it was Bougainville, the Solomon Islands or Afghanistan, were all decisions that were taken by governments of which he was a part when he was Foreign Minister. And I support every one of those, notwithstanding the physical implications of that to me and to my family. I still think they were the right decisions. And the beauty of me is I'm lucky enough to sit in. I get to be in the room. I get to be on a plane sitting opposite the Foreign Minister or the Defence Minister or even occasionally the Prime Minister, and I'm asked for my opinion. And if I can tell the truth and articulate it and have both the intellectual rigour and the persuasive skills to convince the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister or the Defence Minister or the Parliamentary Secretary for the Pacific more often to take a course of action, in my experience, they have always taken my advice. I've never actually found myself in conflict, but if I did find myself in conflict, I have enough faith in the system, this thing we call democracy, that they were put there to make these decisions. They were democratically elected. I'm an instrument of state, and my job was to do that.
So is that, and I think you're quite a special human being to be in that situation. But I also wonder whether the environments in which you have played in the past, in your previous roles, you have been allowed to, your values have been allowed to flourish, and you're not been in a situation where you've been constrained to actually compromise on any of your personal values. Is that a fair call, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of racking through. I'm sort of scrolling through the Rolodex in my mind in terms of the opportunities, the experiences, the things that I've had to do. I mean, even when I was a spokesman for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade back in the day, I mean, that was through the whole. It was a heady time. Things like the Douglas Wood hostage situation in Iraq, and we had the whole Royal Commission into the Australian Wheat Board, the Coal Commission, and the department's role in that, and the government's role in that. And I still stand by the things that were said and that were done. I don't have any. As I say, I'm very lucky that I've had the opportunity to provide advice directly to decision makers, and almost not invariably, but I've never, I cannot think of a single instance where I have been asked to implement something that did not align with my values. I can't think of one. And I think and maybe I'm just remarkably lucky. Maybe I'm very good at the diplomatic two-step and I've dodged a couple of tricky issues. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think I know myself well enough to know there's nothing that I can think of that I have done professionally or personally in my life, either in uniform, the Foreign Service, or in the department, or now in the Australian War Memorial, that I haven't done because it aligns with my values.
Okay, so let's maybe pivot somewhat to reputation. So you've been in a situation where you've had to implement or had to take initiatives that are going to have an impact on your reputation, positively or negatively. Can you reflect on any or what your perspective is in terms of your reputation? How do you protect it? And then can you give examples of where you've actually had to think about making decisions and what that meant to you and the organisation?
Well, we had, as the head of the Australian War Memorial since 2020, of course, it's the War Memorial. We're in the midst of a major redevelopment to create the space to tell the stories of the 100,000 veterans that we've created in the last 40 years. We're in the midst of Afghanistan and in the midst of developing the Afghanistan galleries when the Inspector General of the ADF's Afghanistan Inquiry Report, the so-called Brereton Report, came out. Now, in a way, that's not one for us because it's a separate process. But of course, invariably, you're the Australian War Memorial and they're talking about things that are alleged to have happened at war and our most recent and our longest war. And so, of course, and fairly, journalists are going to come asking you questions. And I remember being asked on the day, and it goes back to my core value, they said, what's the Australian War Memorial going to do about this? And I answered that question by saying, I believe the memorial's best interests are served in whatever the truth is. Whenever that truth's known, we would tell it. But that's a separate process. It's going to take as long as it takes, but the memorial's interests, the nation's interests, will be served by ensuring we tell that story appropriately and in the context of our longest war once more's known. And we still don't know much more than we knew back then in 2020. What then transpired was, without going into the details of sort of the particular news outlet, but very quickly, within 24 hours, we had some of the journalists and the shock jocks saying, remember this name, Matt Anderson, some museum administrator in Canberra was effectively erecting a wall of shame to our special forces, and I was, and this was the allegation, I was aiding and abetting the Taliban. Now that's both professionally insulting, but personally insulting. And I think at the time, so very quickly that went straight to, it wasn't about the Australian War Memorial. It was, Matt Anderson, remember this name. Yeah. So I think that's what I remember more than anything else for the first time in my consciousness, beyond, being an ambassador overseas and talking in the event of a natural disaster or something. It was the first time that my name had been invoked, and it was invoked in such a way as it was intended to inflame. And, our switchboard back in Canberra lit up for days over that one. And, it died down, as invariably it would. But, I jumped on that same radio program that afternoon to speak to another host, just to, again, put what I said into the context of what was being said about me and about the allegations. But it goes back to just knowing what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, who I'm doing it for. Most importantly, a very strong why at the Australian War Memorial, why I work there, and this was at odds with that. But I think telling the truth isn't. I think the long-term standing of the Australian War Memorial is in telling the complete experience of Australia at war. Indeed, Lord Gowrie, VC, when he opened the memorial in 1941, said that when people leave the War Memorial, they should utter never again. The only reason they're going to say that is if they understand the horrors of war and what we ask our men and women to do in our name and in our uniform. So I think for me that was one where very quickly it went from, it wasn't about the Australian War Memorial, it was about Matt Anderson. But what I know, because the memorial, 1 million visitors a year and its place in the nation's consciousness, if you can get Australian War Memorial in a headline, people will click on it, people will read it, people will lean forward and listen in. So that was the game, and that is still the game, of course. But now it's in a far more positive way. But that was a moment of for me, it was very early on. It was in my first year, and I was surprised at how quickly not just the heat was turned up, but the nature of the personal attacks and sort of the comments that came our way were both sort of hateful and hurtful. That's okay. You pay me to accept that and to receive those. That's
up to a point.
That is my job.
Yeah.
And my job is twofold actually. It's to stand in front of the memorial when people are hurling sort of abuse at the memorial or my staff. My job is to stand in front of them and in front of it. And my job is to stand behind my staff when they're throwing roses.
And you do that very, very well. And I think you've just explained and articulated incredibly well how important it is to give the facts, and the facts speak louder than any other variation. And you've stood up against those hearsays to protect your reputation, but also that of the War Memorial. And having a strong reputation, as you do, and the leader of the War Memorial, it actually enforces the strength of the War Memorial. And so I think this comes back to very much astute leadership in terms of leading from the front and ensuring that when you have a strong leader of an organisation, that actually steers it in the right direction.
We hope so. We have these leadership development programs at the memorial, and I talked to some of our junior staff who are just starting to embark on their professional growth and journey. And the first thing I'd say to them in the room is, look around. You've just built a network. You've just got a group. You've got a cohort. You've got others that you can not only influence, but whose networks you now need to use to ensure that you can grow yourself professionally and personally in the memorial, but also grow the memorial in such a way that helps me achieve its mission. But I also say to them, I put up a little graph, and on the y-axis is responsibility and influence, or certainly responsibility, and the x-axis is time. And they see that over time you're growing both in sort of influence and responsibility, that you start down the bottom as a year 12 kid and you end at the top as director of the Australian War Memorial, and that's a perfectly straight linear path. But what I say to them is I then break that down and show them my trajectory, my journey, and it's not linear at all, but the things that make Matt Anderson, the things that make I would like both interesting and probably give me the ballast that I hope I have, is that every time I've aimed at something, I've either fallen short, or there's been a setback, or I've had to pick myself up, or I've done something wrong, and I've learned from it, and then I've got to the next bit and slightly overachieved at that bit, and then I've stuffed up and dropped down a bit, and so that's almost like a sine wave sort of going up that trajectory. But the bits that make Matt Anderson interesting are the bits where I've actually failed or I've fallen short. And that lovely quote, the difference between success and failure is getting up one more time than you fall, is what I genuinely believe. So when staff can have that level of not introspection, but that honesty from the guy who's trying to run the show, saying, I will make mistakes, but the most important thing you can do is own them and learn from them. That's, I would like to think, is part of who I am.
So tell me, can you reflect on that you're prepared to share a mistake or a learning, let's put it this way, a learning in your period of time with the War Memorial, number one? And then secondly, what are two highlights that really stick in your mind that would be really good learnings for viewers of this particular program?
Well, I think when I came into the memorial, it was at a remarkable moment in time. I mean, first things first, I arrived at the memorial in April of 2020, and the memorial was actually closed to the public because of COVID. So the staff, I think my mistake was twofold. One, I didn't understand. I'd come from the United Kingdom back into Australia, so I too was adjusting, but I don't think I understood the impact on memorial staff of bushfires in Canberra, of smoke haze in Canberra, of having closed the memorial to smoke and bush and fires, and suddenly you've got this global pandemic, and they're both physically worried about themselves, they're worried about the organisation, they're worried about their jobs. They were tired. They'd just come off 5 years of sustained. The Australian War Memorial had led the nation's commemoration of the centenary of the First World War. 130,000 people at dawn services at the memorial, a period of sustained pressure, visitation, expectations, travelling exhibitions. My first mistake, I think, was I didn't realise just how tired they were. I didn't have the understanding of the institution well enough and the people well enough to understand that they were all exhausted. And then Matt Anderson arrives, new job, new enthusiasm, let's go. We've just been tasked with building this $498.7 million expansion. Oh, and by the way, we're going to stay open while we do that. And I think the mistake, and is a mistake I made, was not taking the a stress test of the staff to understand where they were on that journey, not understanding whether or not they had bought into it. I just assumed, and this is the mistake I made, was I assumed everyone thought like I thought. I assumed everyone thought this development was a good idea, and some of them hadn't been brought along on that journey, but yet so much was going to be asked of them to deliver it. So it took time to articulate to them, my why. So it's mine's easy. I know, as I say, the veterans have faces for me, and we're going to be telling their stories, and we're going to be giving them the same recognition and meaning in the Australian War Memorial as those who have marched before them. That was always my intention. That was always my drive. That's always been my philosophy, that there is an unbroken line of service from those who rowed ashore in that Ascot landing boat in the First World War gallery to the young men and women who are signing the Tarancot Wall today. It's the same sort of golden thread of service. But I think the mistake I made was I believed that and understood that to be self-evident, but it wasn't to them, and they needed to be brought along. They now have been. What they've implemented, what they've executed is world-class and beyond any measure and expectation. So we got there, but I think the mistake for me was not coming into the organisation and almost... And I went around and I met every section and did all those things, but I don't know how. I don't believe I was asking the right questions to understand just the level of buy-in at different points in time across the memorial. They were fatigued, they were tired, and I should have given them that space to repair and to recover.
But you obviously learned that pretty quickly because you've inspired and lifted them to the outcome that has now been delivered.
Well, that's a credit to them. It's not a credit to me. As I say,
they've got to be led.
Yeah, well,
got to be led. Inspiration.
I often say that I've not so much as turned a screw, driven a nail, or pushed a broom.
No,
but they are heroic, and I'm so proud of them.
So tell me a couple of examples of and highlights of your tenure so far at the War Memorial.
Well, the highlights are every day. I mean, this is the thing. I reflect on the fact that there is working at the memorial is both intensely personal, because it doesn't get more personal than having an unknown Australian soldier entombed on the grounds of the memorial or in the Hall of Memory. So it is intensely personal. The act of commemoration is intensely personal. So, but they're also daily highlights. I mean, just last night we commemorated the 105th anniversary of the Royal Australian Air Force, and have the Chief of the Air Force there and the Warrant Officer of the Air Force there, and the future of the Air Force formed up alongside the pool, and then we commemorate the life and the loss of a Captain Storer from the Australian Flying Corps in 1917. That's a very powerful thing to be reflecting on the loss of someone 109 years ago, and reflecting on him or her, usually in the company of families, but saying how much, you're not only acknowledging how and where they died, but the power of the memorial, the positiveness of the memorial, is this idea that we also celebrate who they were when they lived. And then we can talk to the consequences of war, and what we lost as a nation was what they could have given back had they come home. And so that's a very positive thing. It might sound odd to attend a commemorative service every day and leave there empowered, but I'm left empowered because I watch school children lay wreaths. I watch visitors to the memorial lay wreaths. I watch people who have come to the memorial thinking it was just an Instagram-worthy moment, and get their photo in the commemorative area with the poppies and leave, and they suddenly find that there is a thread that connects them or an element of their family to that place. That's always powerful, to see someone engage with the memorial and be surprised by their own. Australia's population was about 7 million during the Second World War and 960,000 enlisted. So I often say to people, if it wasn't your family, it was your next door neighbour's family. Now we're a migrant nation, so that changes over time, but that still, there's a very powerful, the major wars still have a ripple effect on Australian society. Even the smaller wars have a ripple effect. But I genuinely, that's one of the things that I'm lifted. I leave. With
the last post you're offering?
I leave, and I try and attend every day. There needs to be a pretty good reason to put something in my diary at 4:30 in the afternoon, because that's where I want to be. And that's where I think I need to be, because that helps me make sense. So that's the why of the memorial, and it's my personal, that's my true north. But, it can be, commemorative events. It can be probably one that jumps at me when we were excavating the deepest part of the southern entrance was underneath the stage in the lecture theatre. And we had allocated 10% of the score that we gave to every tender was their veterans engagement strategy. Were they engaging veterans, employing veterans, engaging veteran-owned businesses? What were they doing? So every company that worked, or the major tenders, needed to demonstrate a veterans engagement strategy. Now, the company that was working on the southern entrance, Kane Construction, they had a very good one, and they tipped off their mates up in Sydney that we're at the deepest point and we're about to start pouring concrete. And the 2nd Commando Regiment came down from Sydney, and they all brought their challenge coins, and we wired their challenge coins into the foundations, and then we poured the concrete and we set them. And as one of the young veterans, and he was a veteran, multiple tours of Afghanistan, said to me, we wanted to be involved in this memorial redevelopment from the ground up and forever. So for me to have that validation from a young veteran who had driven down from Sydney to do just that, to have his company's challenge coin placed in the foundations of the memorial and then set in concrete, told me that I was doing the right things for the right reasons for the right people. And that is and remains a very powerful moment in the last few years.
What a lovely way to end a fabulous discussion, which could go on for many, many more hours. Matt, I can't thank you enough for the time you've given me today. But I have one last question before we go. You have such a rich experience and rich knowledge. Who was your mentor or mentors? And is it something that is a philosophy you undertake yourself?
Well, I would certainly like to be others' mentors, and I genuinely offer that to people. I genuinely set my own path. I've led the road less travelled, but I do remember those who have stopped and taken an interest at me at various points. I was sitting, for example, as a young engineering troop commander building a magazine and an armoury in Tonga. I was just out there building a thing. Mum and Dad came across for Easter to spend some time with me. And it was the then High Commissioner was a guy called Howard Brown. Haven't thought of Howard in a long time, but I should have. And Howard pulled Mum aside one day over Easter lunch, and he just said, don't, and he said to me, and he just said, look, don't take this the wrong way, Matt, but for a combat engineer, because that's what I was, a field engineer, he said, don't take this the wrong way, but you'd be a very good diplomat. Now, that's a death nail to a guy whose mission is to blow things up. Right, that was when I was a mine warfare instructor and a demolition supervisor, and out there building a magazine and an armoury for the Kingdom of Tonga. So to have a high commissioner, sort of say I'd be a good diplomat, was interesting as a comment. And Mum sort of leant forward and said, he's always wanted to be a diplomat. Mum would say that. And I just said, Mum, I've never wanted to be a diplomat. And Mum being Mum, went home and she sent me a photo that she had taken years earlier of me studying for my Year 12 exams in Melbourne. And on the little corkboard in my bedroom was, my daily planners and timetables and schedules and things. But there were 2 notices. And one of them was the scholarship applications for the Royal Military College and the Royal Australian Naval College, both of which I ended up applying for and got. But pinned next to it was, on this photo, make a world of difference, join the Department of Foreign Affairs. And it was sitting there. And clearly in Mum's mind, she had hoped I'd gone one way or the other. But she remembered it. Howard saying that to me just probably lit a fire. Probably just lit a fire because I didn't know it at the time. I came home not long after Tonga. I met my lovely wife Lou at a blind date and a dining-in night in the army. She was just back from the UK. And we had that conversation. And she just said, well, why wouldn't you apply for it? And I said, because I wouldn't get in. I just wouldn't get in. They have 6,000 applicants and they take a handful of people. I'm not one of those. I didn't go to the right schools, the right universities. I think I could do it. I just don't think I'd pass through the right gates. Sure. And, the words of Howard, he didn't know it at the time, just were the things I kept going back to. He had confidence in me. He had seen enough of me dealing with Tongans in the middle of the South Pacific to think I had probably the humility, I had the human skills, I had this idea that foreign affairs is about people. my job, as I often say to people, that in the Foreign Service, your job is to convince a human being, someone from another government or another, multilateral organisation, to take a decision that the Australian government has identified is in our interest for them to take. My job then is to convince them that there's a shared interest in taking that decision. But you're in the people business, and he had seen enough of me with the Tongans to think I could do this, and that was a shot in the arm. I bumped into Howard again when I actually joined the department. By this stage, I think he was our ambassador in Iraq. And he had a few touch points where he's always just picked up the phone and said, "How are you doing?" just at the right time. And that's not a heavy-handed mentoring, but it is this. There's an element of continuity in just making sure you're doing okay, or picking up the phone to say, "Well done." And the other person I would obviously say is Brendan Nelson too. And he was the one who rang me about the War Memorial job and encouraged me to take this job.
I remember him telling me, he said, I had a blinding flash of the obvious.
Yeah, well, and so Brendan has maintained a professional interest in me, a personal interest in me. Obviously, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and Brendan is one of those, of course. But as I say, 12 directors of the Australian War Memorial before me, they're all invested in what is one of the nation's most important institutions, and all of them have tried to leave it better than they found it. Brendan certainly did that. My job is to build on what Brendan started and deliver it for our veterans, and for to lead the nation's commemoration and understanding of the Australian experience of war. That's what gets me out of bed every morning. But I think people like Brendan, Kerry Stokes, has been profoundly decent professionally and personally to me. Just showed the right level of interest, the right level of he's pretty good at tough love. He'll tell you how it is, and tell you when I err, and those little course corrections are what you need along the way. So I think, but it is funny. It is just that quiet mentoring of the likes of Howard Brown, who again I haven't thought of since that was 1990 when he first took an interest in me, and I'm here today because of that, and 1,000 other little things. But these are these binary moments that if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be sitting where I am today.
Understand, and I think mentoring is, or having a really good mentor certainly helps you along the way. But you've got to have the talent, you've got to have the ability, and you've got to have the leadership to ensure you can make things happen. There's no doubt you've done that very, very well. And today we're really privileged and honoured that you've taken the time to chat today. Thank you very much, Matt Anderson. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe for more episodes. And if you'd like to learn more about developing your personal brand, please visit garybrown.com.au to get in touch, or grab a copy of Brand New, Brand You.